Another large video, another large application problem that I want to look at is how to apply, how to use proportions to solve these problems. And this is what we're going to end up setting to do. This is where when I said we have 4 different ways to set up every proportion, it's setting it up that is kind of the challenging, if you will, part, because there are different ways to set it up and knowing setting up accurately with our corresponding sides, but how to use this to find the exact measurement by using our cross multiply. Well, let's look at, if we think of the Statue of Liberty, right? Here she is, Lady Liberty, and out there. Okay, great. We want to know, how tall is she? Well, it's kind of difficult to say, let's take a tape measure and let's count, right? I mean, it's not exactly like we're saying our own height, but here's something we can do. Something that would be easy to measure is, let's measure her shadow. Say her shadow is 250 feet, right? I mean, that's something that's easy. That is something that if we have a boat out there, something like that, we can measure the distance of a shadow really easily, because across the ground, that is really easy to measure, right? Let's say we do just take a rope or a long string or a cord or something to do that with. But what is easier for us is, let's measure our height. And I'm going to pick really easy numbers again for us. In our books, we're going to have to do with, say we're 6'3" tall, and we have to convert how many inches that is and add those 3 inches later. I'm going to keep it nice and simple for us, because our goal here is to set up the proportion. If I'm 6 foot tall and now I measure and say I cast a shadow of 5 feet. These are much easier to measure, because it's how tall am I, the same tape measure, how long is my shadow, right? Again, I'm picking really easy numbers for us. But when we say the corresponding sides here, and this is where we have the 4 different ways to set it up. And again, I'm sure that if I were to ask 4 different students here, they could all be picking this differently. To talk about corresponding sides, the only important thing is that we correspond correctly. If I were to say both of my heights, x over 6, and I just randomly pick that as my one, notice that I can say however I want, x over 6 or 6 over x, because that's saying the same corresponding side. That's a different way to set it up. But what's important here is if I were to select x over 6, if I were to say the height of the Statue of Liberty over the height of me, then I'm going to say, oh, well, if I put the x, the Statue of Liberty on the top, I'm going to say that is 250. That's my shadow over the shadow of me, 5 feet. That's how we have to set this up to make sure we're doing it accurately. X times 5 is 5x. 6 times 250, right? Again, we use a calculator for this. I get 1,500. Divide by that 5, and I end up with x equals 300. Now, what was that? That was the height in feet of our Lady Liberty here. But that's how you set this proportion up. But going back to keeping this in full circle, what this means is there are all those different ways to set up this proportion. I could have said, well, let me look first at Statue of Liberty. Right there is x over 250. It doesn't matter how I set this first same one up. As long as I set up correspondingly, I'm still correct. Notice I put the height in the numerator. Notice I put now the shadow in the denominator. Well, I just need to set that up correctly over here. Okay, well, the height is 6 over 5, right? As long as I set that up correspondingly. This looks like a different proportion, right? Well, the 6 and the 5 and the 250 are all in different spots. As long as I match them up correspondingly, I have the 4 different ways to set this up. Notice that when I cross multiply here, I'm going to end up with the same thing. 5 times x equals 250 times 6. We can even see it's going to be the same here. 5x equals that same 1,500 divided by the 5. That same x equals 300. I got the same answer, setting it up differently. But what is essential is that I do it correctly. This is where bringing it full circle. If I set this up wrong, if I were to say, well, x over 250, and if I were to set this up as 5 over 6, when I cross multiply that, if I do this wrong, it's not going to be saying the Statue of Liberty is 300. Maybe I got it wrong a little bit, 290. It's not going to be something that I'm close. It's maybe a rounding error. I'm going to end up saying the Statue of Liberty is 5 inches tall, or the Statue of Liberty is 8 miles tall. It's going to be something that's so far off, you're going to know I made a mistake. Not just I rounded wrong. It's going to be off by a lot if you set that proportion up incorrectly.